Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Mind Split Cafe. Hope everyone had a great holiday with your friends and family. Of course, we have Matt with us today.
What's going on, good people? Mind split people. Love to be
Mind
back.
Splitters.
Mind
Mind Splitters.
splitters. Yeah.
We've got that coin now. And today we have a very special guest, Dr. Aaron Weiner. Aaron, you want to give us a quick little introduction and a rundown of your credentials, and we'll get started.
Yeah, I'd be happy to, and thanks so much for having me. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. I'm an addiction specialist. I'm based out of Lake Forest, Illinois, and I like to talk a lot, which is I guess why I'm here. But I've got some, as I'm sure we're going to get into, pointed feelings about the industry surrounding problems of addiction, and that's ultimately what led me from being more in what I'd call the reactive space, which is where I see clinical work as being, where people have a problem and then we're reacting to it, to trying to be more in the proactive space, where I really try to educate a lot and put information out there because I think that for addiction in particular, there's a lot that if you pull back the curtain, people can see, and once you see what's happening, you can make informed decisions, which is everything. So I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for this one because I noticed that the route we're going to go with this episode is a little different than the other substance abuse episodes that we've had. So I'm kind of excited to see this side of it. And I mean, my first question is maybe off the bat, but marketing. So when these big companies use marketing tactics for addictive substances, how do you think that affects the addiction rate?
Yeah, well, so the data that we have shows that it's very close that use is related to advertising, which should make that should not be controversial at all, right? Like that's
Yeah.
why we advertise is for
Yeah.
people to buy.
That's why companies like 610 Marketing exist. So yeah, go ahead.
Yep.
Right, right. You advertise a product and then people want to use it. The problem is that when your product causes harm, either emotional harm or physical harm, potentially like financial harm in the case of gambling, which we were chatting about just a little before the episode, then things start to get a little bit more ethically dicey. And two of the issues around addictive industries marketing is issue number one is that they disproportionately appeal to young people in their advertising, which is
Mm-hmm.
because a really important piece of data we have is that if someone's going to struggle with an addiction in their life, 90% of the time they have their first one occur before they hit age 20 when they're a teenager. So if you're trying to get someone to develop a habit, addictive habit with your product, the young undeveloped mind is actually even more susceptible to this feedback loop, to the process of addiction than adults are, and then they can also be your customers for life, as the term goes. The second problematic side of this as well is that we know from data that the majority of money that addiction for profit industries make comes from just the percent of users who use the most. So there was one study looking at the alcohol industry that found that 75% of their profits come from the top 10% of consumers, basically those who have alcoholism and are drinking more. I believe it was more than 10 drinks per week. They
Wow.
make 75% of their income off people who drink more than 10 drinks a week. So if you don't have addiction in the addiction for profit world, you don't have profits. If everyone drank responsibly, we would not have Budweiser. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
Mm-hmm.
it creates a very interesting dynamic.
It's an interesting concept. I kind of it's hard to wrap my brain around that, but I mean it is true. The big tobacco companies that have vapes now, they create candy flavored tobacco
Well,
juice, and I believe it's geared towards the undeveloped mind, just like you
I'm
said.
I'm glad you brought that up, Chris, because didn't and forgive me, correct me, but if I get the details wrong, didn't that company Jewel just have they got fined like several $billion for exactly what you said they were doing, Chris, by advertising to minors with
Yeah.
candy flavored, tobacco, right?
Yeah, so they've actually settled a lot of lawsuits. I think it's about $3 billion total right now. They're a shell of the company they once were. And actually, there's a really great documentary that was just released on Netflix called Big Vape, and I'd highly recommend anyone interested in this story check it out. I actually had the author who wrote the book on my podcast about a month ago
And what is
because
your
I was
podcast, Doc?
it's uncreatively named "Let's Talk with Dr. Aaron Weiner" because when I started it, it was a passion project, and I was just like, you know what, we're gonna. But anyway, uncreative name. I think we got
All
some good
good. I just
conversations
wanted you
on
to
it.
plug it.
Uh,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
Yeah.
oh, no, thank you. But great documentary, and they show and they talk about how this ad campaign, and again, anyone if you just want to Google like Juul first ads, like it's very widely documented. The models that they were using, some of them could not have been more than 21 years old. They were clearly appealing to young people. They did not look like a 55-year-old chain smoker when they're like dancing around with like exposed midriffs, and I mean they were young, and it was on purpose, and that's what the documentary gets into. The flavors, though, that you were speaking of, we've banned flavors in cigarettes since 2009 because we know that flavors disproportionately, yeah, they disproportionately appeal to young people. They've been banned. So when you put mango and strawberry and creme brulee into vapes, you know exactly what you're doing.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
That's interesting.
Now, let me ask you this, and I get the marketing side of it. They hired an agency. They're doing what they need to do to sell product to create that, whatever. But
Yeah.
when you talk about alcohol and the flavor drinks that you have now with passion berry, alcohol and whatever, how is that any different than, and I'm not taking the side of the nicotine, the tobacco companies, but how
Sure.
is that any different from, hey, it's okay to do it in alcohol and sell this passion fruit, whatever, vodka, but you can't do it with, tobacco?
Yeah, so that argument I hear a lot with THC and cannabis as well.
Mm-hmm.
And my response to it always is two wrongs don't make a right. You know,
Mm-hmm.
this is so if you look at alcohol policy and what alcohol does in our country, 140,000 people die in the United States every year due to alcohol. This is according to the CDC. Depending on where you look at, it's between 100 140,000. We've lost this many people for at least 10 years, about this many for longer, way more than opioids, but nobody talks about it. And that's because when you look at how certain types of drug use are normalized and promoted, when you look at different political parties having different pet industries, to be perfectly honest with you,
Mm-hmm.
that they
Yep.
support and vilify the other ones, what you get, yes, there's an inconsistent landscape, but it's particularly inconsistent in terms of health. And if we actually cared about health, like there's been a lot written. I posted about this on LinkedIn within the last week. A colleague and friend of mine, Dr. Kara Poland, she wrote an article on alcohol taxes and how there's very clear evidence that if we raise taxes on alcohols, we will have less cirrhosis, fewer motor vehicle accidents due to alcohol. It lowers alcohol reducing harms, related harms, excuse me, because if someone drinks, if you can't afford to buy a 24 pack, but instead you buy even just like a 6 pack of a craft beer, you're going to have a very different outcome from that evening.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
just if you scope it down to so policy really matters. And so just because we've completely if one is a complete dumpster fire, that doesn't mean we should light another dumpster on fire. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying?
Yeah, I totally get it.
Yeah.
But it also
That's
boils that so what I'm hearing is, and you make really, really valid points, and I think they're 1,000% accurate. What I also hear is what is the lobbying budget for said respective companies or industries, right? Like what is the lobbying budget for tobacco industry? What is the lobbying budget for alcohol? What is the lobbying budget for THC Delta 9? You know what I'm saying? Because obviously that kind of lobbying budget is going to help kind of sway the lawmakers in Washington to
Mhm.
say, hey, this is okay and this isn't. You can have flavored alcohol, but you can't have flavored cigarettes. So,
Right. So I don't know that number off the top of my head, but they all are registered. And a while back, we might even be able to Google this. Someone actually made a website that shows you, this was specifically for the tobacco industry, but state by state in state legislatures, how many lobbyists there are and who they work for within the tobacco industry. And it was shocking. I feel like there were 15 in Illinois for like the Illinois state, which is
Wow.
where I am, just for the nicotine industry. And and so when I think about though, what really matters, part of it is how many lobbyists do they employ. And like any social issue, when you ask yourself if like 70-80% of the population or more feels one way but nothing's changing, it's usually because there's a lot of money on the other side. The real
Mm-hmm.
question is who's also pushing on the other side. And what I can tell you, because I'm very well acquainted with folks in the American Society of Addiction Medicine, American Psychological Association, teeny tiny lobbying budgets and a lot of different initiatives that you're going at. Like take ASAM for a minute, the American Society of Addiction Medicine. That's not just alcohol. They have a lot of different, a lot of different areas that they're concerned about. The
Mm-hmm.
alcohol industry has one area and a lot of people pushing their agenda.
Their
So
agenda. Yeah.
it's difficult to get past that.
Now, off camera, we were kind of talking about the gambling and how prevalent it is now become on phones, and that's something that I kind of wanted to talk to you about because I remember being a young man that was striving to play collegiate sports and wanted to be a Division I basketball player, wanted to play in the NBA, yada yada yada. I achieved in the collegiate sport and I got a scholarship, played D1. But I remember posters like in our junior high and our high school locker rooms where it was like betting on sports is taboo. I mean, look at what happened to Pete Rose, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
but now you see, and I watch ESPN all the time. Now you see it is so prevalent. They're giving the lines for the games. They're giving the ESPN just started a bet
Yeah,
app.
ESPN,
Like
ESPN has the lines on all the games too.
it's so
Right.
there's so much. It's so prevalent now where it's no people are. I feel people are becoming callous to the idea that maybe it wasn't as taboo as it was said. You know,
Mhm.
kind of talk to us about that and how you feel about the what's going on now in that kind of that industry.
Yeah. So interesting, right? If we look at this almost like a case study. So the law that got struck down by the Supreme Court that made all states essentially be able to determine their own fate in terms of where and how you can gamble. That happened in 2018. So that's been about 5 to 6 years now that
Mm-hmm.
states have been able to decide for themselves. And you're right, it has gotten so pervasive, so normalized now that betting lines are ticking across the bottom of ESPN, and like the sports app I use on my phone now has a whole betting tab on it
Mm-hmm.
because not only is it being and to be honest with you, I don't know if they're making money off of it unless it's being pushed out by some sort of betting or casino or something. I don't know. But regardless about it, look at how pervasive that is compared to, say, something that has an industry that is trying to grow right now, like THC, the cannabis
Mm-hmm.
industry. Not to say that it hasn't, it has, but it's been decades and it's nowhere near as accepted and widespread and like as betting is. My hunch about why this is the case, and it is a huge issue. There's more people coming into my practice for betting than I've seen in a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
It is right there on their phones. It makes it so easy to access. I think part of the reason why you're seeing it pick up so much more quickly is even though to a certain extent sports betting was taboo, I think that it's a lot more palatable because who hasn't played like a hand of poker, right? Where you bet some
Mm-hmm.
money or who hasn't made casual small bets with friends. It's a lot easier than to think of, well, why don't I give this a try? It's another app on my phone. They're giving me this amount for free. So like the windows into it, people already have their toe in the pool. It seems a lot more palatable. There's a lot of reasons why the riskiness of it, perhaps as well, to get started. That bar is a lot lower, and the access couldn't be higher.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'm glad that we backtracked to the betting side of things or the addiction to betting because I had a burning question, and now that we've discussed that sports betting, sportsbook is more sociably acceptable now and not as taboo. I mean, I'll go ahead and say it. I enjoy betting. I live in a state that allows me to bet legally. So I do enjoy betting here and there. So what causes, or what will how do I put this? What will show that I've crossed that line from casually sports betting to now I have a sports betting addiction?
That's a great
What is
question.
that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you make a really great point, right? The majority of people who engage in a lot of addictive, potentially addictive behaviors or activities don't become addicted to it. Like alcohol, for example, right? I think the rate of addiction to that is under 10%. Same thing with THC. So like most people will engage in these types of behaviors and not develop a pathology to it. I think for me, but that doesn't mean that it's not a problem for anybody. And if the COVID years taught us anything, it was that a small percentage of a very large amount of people is still a very large amount of people, and it affects a lot of
Yeah,
lives.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for me, when I think about for folks engaging in any potentially addictive activity, I like to stress four main areas for folks to watch out for, just to ask themselves, is this maybe a problem? The first is the purpose for the behavior. And in particular, is the purpose to deal with emotional problems? And are you using it for escapism and coping,
Or
as opposed to
Band-Aid.
just,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
yeah, because that's the first, at least yellow, if not red flag around the use of something like this. Because if that's what you're using it for, you're going to probably end up using it that way on a daily basis eventually, right? If
Mm-hmm.
that's how you do it. So that's one. The second one is the consequences of use. Are there problems that are coming from it, and you keep doing it anyway? So, like in the case of gambling, the question, like you'd have to start looking at, like, are you able to pay your bills or not? Is this something that you're having to hide from, say, like your wife, so that, or your partner, so that they don't get angry at you? Those sorts of things. Or are there consequences and you keep going anyway? The third is control. Do you stop when you want to stop?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of an instance or over time. Like if you say, I'm gonna, like I'm going to the casino with 150 and that's it, and that's all you do, and if you lose 150, you're done. Or do you end up going to the ATM? Or do you end up
Mm-hmm.
placing more bets than you intended? Do you chase your losses and end up losing more? And
Yeah.
the fourth one is just quantity, which I actually de-emphasize because it's so easy to look at someone else and be like, I'm not as bad as that person, therefore I don't have a problem with this. Or I don't do this every day, therefore it must not be a problem. Even though maybe the consequences are very high and control is impaired to some extent. So I like to look at those four areas. What's the purpose? Do you have control? Are you having consequences? And then just how much? If there is just a huge amount, for example, that you're either betting or that you're drinking or whatnot. That's my measuring stick.
Fantastic. Yeah.
yeah, it kind of seems like those four questions can kind of be utilized across the spectrum of substance abuse or addiction, sorry, that it can bleed into substance abuse or alcohol, opiates, things like that as well, correct?
Oh yeah, no, that's
I like
any
questions. Kind of, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'd say any addictive behavior, and I would say taking a substance can be an addictive behavior in its own. I mean, that's what we know from gambling, pornography. There are behaviors that you can do that press on the same reward circuit, even if it's not there aren't the extra chemical hooks that some substances have.
Hmm.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So now you had mentioned when we started talking about gambling that some of these sites will offer you, like a no sweat bet, or deposit 500 and we'll match you 500. Psychologically, how does that lead to someone becoming addicted to gambling, or what is that? How does that play into someone's head psychologically?
And that's just more like the hook, right? That's
Yeah,
the bait, and you drop the hook in the water and hoping you're catching some sort of fish that, eats the bait, right?
Yeah, well, so there's so many principles. We could probably do like a triple episode just
Well,
on like
let's do
how
it.
gambling addiction works. Um, well, so I'll just highlight a few, right? So starting with the basics, which is that gambling problems all hinge on the fact that it's designed around the most habit-forming type of behavioral reinforcement, which is called a variable interval. Excuse me, it's a variable ratio reinforcement schedule. What that means is that you press the button enough times. You don't know how many times you're going to press the button, but you press it enough times, you're going to get a positive reward out of it. And because you don't know it's going to be every 3 times. It's not like every 5 minutes. You know it involves pressing the button, and you never know when it's going to happen. It might even happen 3 times in a row. And we know from a lot of experimenting that that is actually from behavioral a behavioral hook, that's the best way to do it. And so from the perspective of the website or the app or the casino, what they want to be able to do is give you that positive reinforcer, ideally in a way that's maybe not, a net loss for them to start, but at least if they get that into you early and give you that thrill of winning, right? Then you want to find that thrill again. When I think
Mhm.
about some of the most, there are a lot of strategies and tactics I've seen that are really predatory, but one of the ones that gets me, I actually posted about this on LinkedIn like, I don't know, 6, 8 months ago or something, but is like that no sweat bet that you were talking about. So what it is generally, but the ad I saw was not that you get your money back, but it was like up to $1,500. If you lose it, they will give you that back in free bets, which doesn't mean you get that money back. You still give them
Yep.
that 1,500, but you can bet it again. And what that does is it gives you your first opportunity to chase your losses, which is one of the
Mhm.
biggest
You double
no-nos in
down.
Yep.
gambling addiction.
Yeah.
Right? So they'll for free they'll let you chase your losses and get you started thinking, and hey, maybe you even do win some of it back. But that's part of it too, right? You can feel like you're winning even if actually you're still losing. And that's
Yeah.
how all of this is set up to give you that sense of, that elation of winning, that sense of accomplishment, get you back in that pattern of going more, going more. I can win it back. I can win it back. Even like they've got like these reward tiers where like the more money you lose, the more money they give you to give back to them, and give you medals and achievements and stuff for losing money. And develop, like if you look at like the platinum tier of these apps, like everyone there pretty much has a gambling
Yeah.
disorder, and they know it. They know
And
it.
and it's it's common in Las Vegas casinos or just casinos in general. Like,
Mhm.
hey, you bet. You get to a tier. They don't care if you win or lose. Hey, we'll comp you a room tonight because you just
Right.
lost $3,500 at the table, right? We'll give
And
you
well, that further
$175 room night, So
and doing that further lodges that hook in them because now they're there still, they're staying there. So now they have more
yeah,
time in the casino. They
yeah,
feel that, giving rewards. Oh, I lost
yeah.
so much. And so, I mean,
They're
that
not,
just
yeah, they're
further
not
lodges
comping you
them.
a room at at the facility for gambling addiction, right? They're comping you a room in the
Yeah.
casino to get
You're right
you,
there.
yeah.
It's like, why do they put the milk at the back of the grocery store, right? So you have to walk through the store to get
Mm-hmm.
the product that everyone wants to buy, right? You're still there. Same thing with the drinks, right? Why do you give out drinks at casinos? Because it lowers your inhibitions. It gives you like that pleasurable reward, and
Yeah.
all of it just keeps you there losing more money.
Yeah.
It's the
Oh my
business model.
gosh. You put it so simplistically, like, there's a reason, like I read an article that Costco loses so much money on their $5 like
The hot
chickens,
dogs. Yeah, it's
Chickens,
the hot
yeah.
dogs too.
and they put them all the way in the back, and they lose so much money a year on those $5, rotisserie chickens. But it was the reason why we put them in the back is because you got to go all the way in the back, and when you're walking back to the front, you're stopping by, you're walking down the aisle, you're getting something else, you're getting something else,
Yeah,
and
that's what they keep the toilet paper in mind.
yeah.
Everyone needs toilet
There's
paper.
a reason to the rhyme.
Yeah, and it goes back to the marketing that we kind of addressed in the beginning of the
Yeah,
show. You put
Well,
it
absolutely.
and
so
there's
simplistically. It's really nice. It's comforting to hear that there's definitely a rhyme to the reason. You know.
Well, it's about opening eyes, and letting people. If you see what's happening, then you can choose, kind of like where we started, and ultimately, part of why I'm so passionate about talking about this now is that if you look at nationwide surveys on mental health, we are struggling right now more than we have in any time in recent memory in terms of depression, in terms of anxiety, and that's part of why we're seeing addictive behaviors tick up too. Addiction is, in my opinion, a metastasized coping strategy. People are
Hmm.
trying to find peace, they're trying to find pleasure, they're wanting to just feel okay, which is a incredibly normal thing to want. However, these things sell the promise of that peace and contentment, but it's not real. But there are all these industries right now that are pushing it forward, that are springing up. When they're given a legislative opening, they just run right through it like the Kool-Aid man because they know you can hook someone right now, right? And they want that and they need that, and people really desire help. Like that's part of why mental health practitioners, we're flooded with people clinically right now. Like you can barely talk to anyone, in my experience, at least in my area, who's not full. And so
Wow.
people are trying to figure out like how do I feel better? So they're like going on TikTok for their mental health advice, and they're betting online, and they're using addictive products because people are just wanting to feel okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely I agree with that 1,000%. Now, but I mean, is you said that your practice is full, so and you're here as an advocate to talk about what's going on. Like, is it? I'd be remiss to not ask you. Like, isn't this good for business for you? Like this addiction, or what these marketing agencies are doing to the masses, even though it's a small group, but it is a large group, like you said. Isn't
Yeah.
that good for your business?
So the statistic, every time I see a statistic on this, it hovers around 10%. That 10% of people with an addictive problem actually get help for it.
Mm,
Yeah.
So my perspective on this is that there's no amount of improvement probably in my lifetime. I don't mean to be cynical, but that could make it so that there would be no one out there with an addiction problem who needs help. Um, but yeah, no, I mean, I guess in some sense, but it's just the scale of the problem right now is so large. I think depending
yeah.
on if you just look at substances, I think it's 8% of the country right now has a diagnosable substance use disorder, and we're not even talking about
Wow.
gambling. You
That's
know,
that's
so
insane, Doc.
that's
Massive.
so many people.
That
So
is.
that's part of why I speak out. You know, like if anything, like it's being able to reach more people than I can see in my practice
Mm-hmm.
is incredibly meaningful.
Yeah, and please don't misunderstand. I wasn't trying to, I wasn't trying to say, hey, well, I was just trying to point out, like, and I'm glad that you said this small percentage is only 10%. There's 90% of other people that aren't even looking for help. And
Yeah.
you're just trying to be an advocate for the people that need help. And I respect that about you. And I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Oh my gosh, it's absolutely my pleasure. And the good news about where we are right now, I'm excited to see where it goes in the next 5 to 10 years. But another topic we haven't gone too much into today is that I'm a huge believer in using technology to reach more people. Mobile apps, AI interventions. I think
Mm-hmm.
that breadth, the scale of need right now is so great that we have to be able to help people with problems that are on the milder side but are growing. We have to be able to get to them with
Okay.
scalable solutions. And so my hope, like right now, people are trying to seek out videos and lessons and courses, and there's some really good ones out there, some apps that can help with this. I'm very hopeful that in the next 5 to 10 years, people will know like, hey, I think I'm developing a problem with gambling, or I'm developing a problem with THC or with alcohol. What do I do? And that there's an actual answer for them that can help them start to move in a direction where it gets better rather than worse over time without even necessarily needing to see someone like me.
Yeah. Now, do you have, I mean, that's a fantastic idea, just, but do you have any of those resources available to um the masses right now? Do you have anything, videos that you would like to share, or website?
Oh, I mean, I've got some just educational videos on my YouTube channel, and you can type my name in there. That'll pop up. I mean, I like to
Okay.
think there's some good information on my podcasts, but so some apps that I like a lot, just off the top of my head. Mindfulness is a fantastic intervention for a lot of different behavioral health conditions. My two favorite apps for that are 10% Happier and Headspace. There's a great CBT related app called cognitive behavioral therapy related app called Sanvello. I should mention I don't get any money for any of this. I'm not
Of course.
affiliated.
Yeah.
There's a great one for anxiety called Unwinding Anxiety, a great book by the same name. And the same folks created another one called Craving to Quit for tobacco cessation that uses a lot of mindfulness and cognitive behavioral principles to help with those specific problems. And there's probably more we could go into, but off the top of my head, those are some really good ones that have data behind them that if
Mm-hmm.
someone has, we'll call it like a mild to moderate problem, there's a solid chance that they might get a lot out of those products,
Yeah.
maybe get better.
Catch it,
Um,
catch it in its infancy before it goes on the other side, pretty much. Yeah. Makes
yeah.
So
total sense.
I'm glad you brought up. I'm sure we're coming up close to time, but I'm glad you brought up CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, because I wanted to ask, what does a typical treatment plan look like for someone in addiction, not necessarily substance abuse, but gambling addiction or pornography
Mhm.
addiction. What does a treatment plan look like for that?
Yeah. So the first part of any treatment plan is understanding the why. Like, why is somebody using? Because it's rarely just about the gambling or the porn or the
Mm-hmm.
substance or whatever it is. We've got to find out why. There's an underlying emotional need. They are using a strategy to meet that need that is destructive. And so we need to make sure that at the bare minimum, we have a way for them to meet that underlying need with a strategy that's sustainable. So whether or not, again, that has to do with cognitive behavioral therapy or mindfulness or behavioral activation or act or there's so many different ways to go about it. We're going to come up with a plan for that. Then the actual addictive behavior itself, we've got to figure out what's the best way and what resources are needed to manage it. So things that we might leverage in could be things like peer support groups, like Smart Recovery, 12-step fellowships, things of that nature. Sometimes someone really needs to get distance from triggers or access, which again for like gambling on phones is really tough. But you can say
Mm-hmm.
self-exclude from certain apps and casinos. Sometimes folks need to go to a residential facility for a little while just to build healthier daily habits that they can then ideally bring back and bring back to that environment and have success with. But we've got to look at the way we look at these problems these days is through something called the biopsychosocial model. There's a biological side to this, there's a psychological side to this, and there's a social side to this. And so we want to look at each of those three, legs of the stool, if you will, and make
Mm-hmm.
sure that we have a solution in mind that we want to shoot for, and then give that a shot. And ideally, it gets someone where they want to go. And if not, we adapt as we go along.
Very well said.
Very well
Uh,
said.
yeah, I'm glad that you brought up the three prong approach to addiction and biopsychosocial model. I think that, I mean, that kind of plays a part in everyone's life. It's kind of hard not to see someone that can have an addiction to something because there's so many aspects that are involved that can lead to addiction.
Yeah, yeah. And to be honest with you, and this might be a little far from some of my colleagues, but I see addiction as operating along very similar lines as like obsessive compulsive disorder, as other anxiety disorders in particular, where you're trying to feel okay, and you
Mm-hmm.
develop a habit loop that's self-reinforcing. And so really it doesn't have to be, treating addiction is not rocket science when you understand what's going on. You just have to see what's going on and then work with that system. And there are shared components across a lot of different people, and then there's individual parts for everybody. But it's something that by and large people can get over the top of. It's just a matter of coming up with the right formula for each individual person.
Fantastic.
And, and I got one last one. As a society, what steps can we take to provide better support for people dealing with addiction?
Better support. So that's a really good question. So personally, and I just published an op-ed with a colleague of mine named Linda Richter in the Chicago Tribune about addictive related advertising. And that's something where I think that we can really try to back away from policies that normalize or even celebrate addictive behaviors. I know I've even made mention of the fact I don't like the fact that people talk about like binge-worthy TV shows or that video games being addictive is a good thing. I think that again just undersells a really serious problem, and
Mm-hmm.
makes it normalizes unhealthy behaviors when we use that sort of verbiage in that way. So I think that we can watch our language. I think we can watch our advertising policies. I think that we can invest in care and access to care. I think we can make it not taboo to talk about, because addictions are things that grow in secret. And so when people feel
Mm-hmm.
like they can't talk about it, they end up just still having the problem and then just getting worse on its own. Which, in the case of, say, things like street drug use and particularly opioids, can end up in people being dead, and or in the case of gambling, bankrupt. So,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot we can do to make it safe to talk about and provide pathways to healing that I think that we're not doing right now, as well as when we look at the industry side, because again, not to beat a dead horse, but addiction is the only behavioral health problem where there's literally people out there peddling it. No one's peddling trauma, no one's peddling anxiety, but people are out there selling addiction to you. And the more people that they get addicted, the more money they make. And we have to be aware of that. We have to acknowledge that and then design our policies around pushing back against that, because otherwise we're seeing the result.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
absolutely. I've never really thought of it that way, that there's someone's out there peddling addiction. I've never really thought of it that way, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
So,
Fantastic.
Matt, you got any other burning questions you want to lay on them?
I'm just soaking it all in. Dr. Weiner, thank you so much. Like this is going to be one of my favorite episodes that I can, revisit. You're welcome back anytime you want to come back, and we can talk as much as you want. Like this was an absolute refreshing and a, just wealth of knowledge. So thank you so much, Doc.
Yeah, we definitely unpacked a lot today, and I'm sure there's so much more we can unpack. So I definitely see a part 2 coming on up with you. We'd love to have you on. Before we say our goodbyes to the viewers, I just wanted to bring up last episode, we did discuss a giveaway with Your Worth It Apparel, and we have 2 winners. So we're sending off 2 hoodies, one to Arizona with a Robert Thompson. So congratulations there. And then we'll be sending our second one to San Antonio, Texas for Frank Della Rosa. So I appreciate
Awesome.
you guys listening in and participating. We'll get those hoodies out to you as soon as we can.
We're going to send one to Chicago too. Doc, you got one coming.
Yeah, we'll get you 2.
All right.
All right, Doc. You're welcome back anytime. Thank you so much.
Oh gosh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
Tune in next week, guys. Another great episode of Mind Split Cafe. We'll see you soon, Mind Splitters.
Thanks, everyone.
Like, we weren't supposed to come up with something this clean. Like, something happened.